All right. We are in Romans chapter 6 this morning. Romans chapter 6. And last week was exciting because it was free, right? We're freed. Was the last sermon. What went wrong? Now we're slaves. And it's interesting because this chapter, Paul he'll relate to us in terms of as slaves 8 times in the rest of this chapter. So we are set free from the bondage of sin, but now slaves to something else. Now I want you to think for a moment, if you will, just for a second, what it would be like to be a slave. Now some of you are like, I already know, you don't know where I work. And others of you are like, you don't know my wife, right? Or my husband. And of course, my kids, they'll tell me, Dad, you're a slave driver. I used to say that to my dad too. But all this just goes to show that we really don't have a concept in our culture of slavery. I mean, for us, slavery is like an archaic thought, maybe a dark part of our history that we don't want to remember too much or we study in school. But slavery just doesn't really relate to our everyday experience, and so it's kind of a difficult thing. Now in first century Rome, it was very easy to understand, what it meant to be a slave. There are so many slaves in Italy, just in that portion of the Roman Empire, what is current day Italy, it made up 40% of the population. And so you can imagine that everybody ran into a slave every day, and they knew the harsh realities of what their life was like and all of that. In fact, in the Roman Empire, there were 6 million slaves across the Roman Empire, which is quite a large percent. If you look at total population, it's about 10% of the entire population were slaves. And so people knew what slaves were about. And Paul, of course, is writing to Rome, and there was probably more slaves in Rome than per capita than there was in Italy per capita. So, but my guess is now I just gave you some statistics about how many slaves there were, and I didn't see anybody grab for a tissue. I didn't see anybody tear up, and that's a problem because I'm trying to teach the Bible to a group of people about a subject that we really don't connect with. And that's always a Bible translator or a Bible teacher's problem, is when we get into the Word of God, there are things that aren't necessarily going to relate to maybe our culture. There was a missionary actually who was translating a portion of Scripture, and one of the words that he was translating was obedience. And he couldn't figure out how to write this in their language because they didn't seem to have an equivalent that exactly meant obedience. And so he was praying about that, and one day he was out working in his yard, and his dog was overdoing something he wasn't supposed to, so he called the dog, said, "Come here," and the dog came and sat like he trained it to do. And one of the natives saw this, and he says, "Boy, that dog is really giving you his ear." And so he's like, exactly. And so that's what he translated obedience, to give our ear. In that culture, that's kind of what that meant. Now, same type of problem. Bruce Olson, when he was with the Modelonis, he told them the story of the foolish man builds his house upon the rock. Now, they live in tents. And so to them, they're thinking, what an idiotic thing to do to build your tent on a rock. Of course you build your tent on the sand where you can drive the stakes deep, right? And so he had to rewrite that parable to match their culture. The foolish man builds his house on a rock. The wise man builds his house on the sand. It's just a difference in understanding of things. And so to Paul's audience, the concept of slavery would stir emotion. It would have deep meaning. To some people, it would even bring up deep sadness in their life. And the thought of becoming a slave to anybody within the Roman Empire would have brought a terror upon them. And so I was praying about this and thinking, how can this relate to our culture at all? And then it hit me. I feel like it was the Lord. He told me, it's in our culture, the closest equivalent to a slave is somebody who's an addict. Now, when we think about an addict, we think about addiction and the things that people struggle at, and I'm sure that every single one of us has had maybe somebody in their family, a close relative, or perhaps even yourself, that has struggled with the bondage of addiction, and that becomes a very real thing. And now some of you are thinking of those people, and you're starting to think about the tissues and stuff like that, right? because that hits the chord of where our society is at. Where in Paul's day, addiction was definitely there, but there wasn't so many things to grab a hold of people as there are in our day. And so, when you think of this, and if we want to get the full impact of what he's talking about when he's talking about slavery, he's talking about bondage, he's talking, think about addiction. That will kind of help you to understand where we're coming from. So if you'll stand with me, we will read Romans chapter 15, Romans 6:15 through 23. What then? Shall we sin because we are not under law, but under grace? Certainly not. Do you not know that whom you present yourselves slaves to obey, you are that one's slaves whom you obey, whether sin leading to death or obedience leading to righteousness? But God be thanked that though you were slaves of sin, yet you obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine to which you were delivered, and having been set free from sin, you became slaves of righteousness. I speak in human terms because of the weakness of your flesh. For just as you present your members as slaves of uncleanness and of lawlessness leading to more lawlessness, so now present your members as slaves of righteousness for holiness. For when you were slaves of sin, you were freed in regards to righteousness. What fruit did you have then in the things which you are now ashamed? For the end of those things is death. But now, having been set free from sin and having become slaves of God, you have your fruit to holiness, and the end everlasting life. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. You may be seated. Now, just to set the scene, and Paul has kind of come full circle, he's kind of come back here, but remember that he kind of you give that inaugural statement, that foundational statement in Romans chapter 1, verse 16, where he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. And so this gospel that we're given of Jesus Christ is the power that God uses to save mankind. Well, what does that mean? Well, the gospel, of course, means good news. And the good news is that Jesus Christ, God in the flesh, came to this world, died on a cross, bearing your sin, bearing the sin of the whole world. And because he lived a perfect life, he never sinned, and he died for our sins. If you believe in him, it doesn't matter where you've been, it doesn't matter what you've done, it doesn't matter how bad a person you've been or how good you think you are, if you will put your trust in Jesus Christ, you will not perish, the Bible tells us in John 3:16, but have everlasting life. Now you pass from death to life. And with the heart one believes unto righteousness, with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. And whoever puts their trust in Jesus will never be put to shame. It's a beautiful message. It's good news. How do we receive that? He tells us in the next verse, in verse 17 in chapter 1, he says it is by faith. The righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just or the justified or those whose sins have been forgotten shall live by faith. Faith in Jesus. He did it all. Not faith in myself, not trusting in myself, but trusting in God and his goodness. Not trying to get up the mountain to God, but believing that God came down the mountain to me and that he paid my debt and now I can be set free. That's what the gospel is. It's beautiful. And yet there's always holdouts when it comes to the gospel, isn't there? It doesn't matter how simple, how beautiful, how amazing this good news is. There are always people who say, I don't need it. The number one person would be like, I'm an atheist. I don't even believe in God. And yet God says, you know what? They're without excuse. Because the visible attributes of God, God exists, is clearly seen in the things that are created, and more so in our day than ever. They try to mask it with evolution and all this stuff, but when you look at a DNA code, a computer code that's self-error correcting, that can be taken apart and decoded and then taken, and proteins can be built to build other things. It's amazing. I mean, it is phenomenal to look at what is created. And a digital code does not come by accident, right? It's so complex, so intricate, so beautiful in its design. And he's saying, you are without excuse. And yet, even though they knew God existed, they wouldn't retain God in their heart, in their mind. And so he says that their minds were darkened, their thoughts were darkened, and they were given over to debase things. And that's what happens to a culture. I don't know if you know any cultures like that, when they reject God and say God doesn't exist, we came from monkeys or something like that, and then all of a sudden everybody starts acting like animals. I don't know if you know anything like that, examples. Oh yeah. Anyway, and he says this is what you're going to do. You're going to go into all lewdness and nastiness. I mean, this is basically what the culture will turn into, and he gives that description in chapter 1, American family values. Chapter 2, he goes to the next group of people, and that is the group of people, it's probably the majority of the population, who says, yeah, well, I believe in God, but I'm a good person. I'm a good person. And this is what he says to that person, the moralist. He says, hey, how can you escape the judgment of God when you judge people by saying you're a good person, I guess, by thinking you're good, and yet you practice the same things? How are you going to escape the judgment of God? And so he condemns the person who calls himself a good person. And then you go down to the last group, and that's the group of people who are like, hey, we're good. We joined the club. We are card-carrying Christians. We were baptized, we were confirmed, we were consecrated. We are in the church. We are circumcised. We're in the mosque. We're in the synagogue. Wherever you are, we are there. And because of our membership, because of our hard work, we're going to be saved. We earned it. And he says, oh, there's no earning it. The only person who's saved is the person who comes by faith. And all your work does not amount to anything. It's only by faith that the righteousness of God can come upon a person, believing that Jesus did it all. And so he condemns everybody under sin, and he says that that there's none good, no, not one, in chapter 3. And then he goes on to say, and all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But then he talks about them being freely justified by his grace. And we talked about that word justified, didn't we? That word justified means that your sin has been removed. The word justified means that there's no record of sin. No record of sin. And he justifies, he tells us in chapter 5, he justifies the ungodly. It's beautiful. Now in chapter 6, as he talked about grace abounding in chapter 5, where sin abounded, grace abounded much more, and how Adam brought sin into the world, and by one man, Jesus Christ, grace came to everyone, and where sin abounded, grace superabounded. He starts out in chapter 6, verse 1, saying, well, shall we continue in sin then, that grace may abound? In other words, should we just continue to live like we were before, accept Jesus, but just continue on the same path in sin? He says, God forbid. Certainly not. In no way should you continue that way. For he who has accepted Jesus has died to sin. And if you've died to sin, how can you live any longer in it? In other words, your old man, we talked about, was crucified with Jesus, that you might be born again, a new creation. And that's what happens when you accept Jesus into your life, is he comes in and he changes who you are from the inside. If you have if you are a new creation, then how are you just going to continue on in sin? He says, it's not the way that it's supposed to be. And it's not the way that a born-again believer wants to live. In fact, they find it very difficult when they start to sin again. Because there's this voice now saying, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Where are you going? And they can't enjoy it like they used to. You can't just run headlong into sin without the Holy Spirit speaking to them. It becomes a problem for somebody who wants to sin as a Christian. But then he says, we're not under the law, but under grace. And that brings up the next question, which is in chapter 6, verse 15, where we find ourselves this morning. What then, shall we sin because we are not under the law, but under grace? Certainly not. He gives us the same, God forbid, certainly not. By no means is what that means in the Greek. And the reason that this is different, and this is very different from the first one, is the first one is talking about, shall we continue in sin? Shall we live a lifestyle of sin? This one is, shall we commit sins? Now that I'm a Christian, and now that I've forsaken sin, should I just, every once in a while, if I want to, should I do that forbidden thing, eat of that forbidden fruit? Just once. Is there any problem with doing that? He's saying, certainly not. Now, I don't know if you remember, just a few years back, we had posters and drawings all over town. And it was one on the building said, don't meth around. And another one said, not even once. You have these different pictures all over town. And it was kind of a campaign against methamphetamine. And the idea or the thrust behind the campaign is if you use methamphetamine once, you can become addicted. And it's crazy to think that, hey, I want to go into something and do something that could ruin my life in one moment. And yet people are drawn to that. And so too it is with sin. You don't realize it oftentimes. You think, it's pretty safe. In fact, maybe in the past you sinned, you did something and, seems like I got away with it. I didn't, get in trouble. And I asked Jesus to forgive me, and of course, if I confess my sin, He's faithful and just to forgive me my sin and cleanse me for all unrighteousness, I'm forgiven. And maybe that's a good thing, but maybe that's also not such a good thing if my tendency is to go back to it again and again and again, thinking that I'm okay, and Satan just kind of dangles that in front of you like, hey, just nibble a little bit, nibble a little bit, nibble a little bit, until you can set the hook. And the next thing you know, you are in bondage to that. Oh, I can't give this up now. I don't know how I'd live without it now. And yet what it does to a Christian is it just makes us miserable. Because we can't live as a Christian and in sin at the same time without feeling horrible. And the book of Numbers never said anything truer when it said, Numbers 32:23, and be sure that your sin shall find you out. Notice he doesn't give the law as a response as to why we shouldn't sin. He doesn't say, you shouldn't sin because the Bible says so or because the law says so. What does he say? He says, do you not know? He reasons with us. Do you not understand? Have you not accepted or come to the conclusion in your life that to whom you present yourselves slaves to obey, you are that one slave whom you obey, whether sin leading to death or obedience leading to righteousness. Now track with me. Whatever you give into, whatever you are giving yourself over to, he's saying, that is what you're going to be addicted to. That is what you're going to want to serve. If I start to toy with sin, I will find myself having a hard time overcoming sin. But if I surrender to the Lord and give myself over to Him, by spending time with Him and reading His Word, in time, I become addicted to Him. I become craving. I Jones for Jesus, right? One of those ends badly. One of those two that I just gave you, doesn't it? With shame, regret, embarrassment, difficulty, or pain. The other changes our life. Makes us a better citizen. Makes us a better father or mother. Makes us a better husband or wife. The other one gives us love and joy and peace and patience and gentleness. The other one is Jesus, right? You see the point. Verse 17, it says, but God be thanked that though you were slaves to sin, you obeyed obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine to which you were delivered. I remember vividly, as an 18-year-old boy, before I came to Jesus, I remember the emptiness that I had. It was empty almost all the time. There was something that actually was not super empty. There was something that was close to satisfaction, and that was this one thing. The one thing that seemed to satisfy just a little bit before I was a Christian was anticipation. The anticipation of something good, something I thought I wanted, something I thought I needed. And it was so exciting to think, if I could just have her, or if I could just have that job or that car, or if I could just get that, if I could just have that motorcycle. And going through life, there's different things that are coming up. I can't wait for this vacation to come or whatever. And the anticipation is very thrilling. But then what happens? You get what you wanted. Oh man, it never satisfies the way that you anticipated it would. In fact, it ends up leaving you feeling kind of empty. And so you move on to the next anticipation. Now, at worst, it leaves you feeling empty. Or, excuse me, at best, it leaves you feeling empty, but at worst, it leaves you with regret, with secrets to hide, with pain. And these are the things you do, and just as a vicious cycle that you continue to go through, because that's all there is. That is until I got saved. And praise God, when I got saved, I was at the low point that I was at. And I was in a very dangerous place as a young man because my margins were very narrow. And I felt very empty inside, and I was very afraid, and I had a lot of things going on that just made me very volatile. And so when I came to Jesus, I didn't come to Jesus with this, I think I'm going to try Jesus. I like my life pretty good. I think I'm going to, try me a little Jesus and see how that works. No, it wasn't like that at all. It was like, I need something to kill me and change me or radically reform me or something. And I knew that there was nothing in me that could do that. I tried religion before. I tried, okay, from now on. I don't know how many times I said, okay, from now on. From now on, I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to stop doing this. And okay, God, I'm sorry. I'll do this from now on. And I came to Jesus realizing that He was taking away my sin. I wasn't making any promises. I was like, God, if that's true that You can forgive all my sin, I want that. But I need You to do something to me because I cannot live a Christian life. I didn't need some weak religious system that gave me a bunch of rules to follow. I needed transformation. I needed a new birth. And that's what I reached to God for and said, I will accept nothing less. I give You everything. I give You my whole life and all the junk and mess that I've made in my life, and I abandon everything behind me. Oh, sure, there was things that I liked in my life, things that I was afraid to give up, things that I thought, well, how am I going to live if I can't do that? It was amazing how Jesus, when He moved in, all of a sudden I didn't want to do that stuff. All of a sudden, I was changed. There was something very, very different about what He had done in my life. I run into a lot of people who lack as Christians. They don't really have victory in their lives. And I think the reason is because they just won't quite give up their life. Still trying to hold on to it. Jesus said this, he who finds his life will lose it, but he who loses his life for my sake will find it. Jesus recorded saying something like this 6 times in the Gospels. The strongest one is in John chapter 12, verse 25, when he says, he who loves his life will lose it, and he who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. The teaching that they obeyed in verse 17 from the heart, that doctrine, that's where doctrine means teaching, to which they were delivered, was that they believed that they could put their trust in Jesus, that they could place their life in His hands. Now, what does it mean to place my life in Jesus' hands? Here's an illustration for you. I've given you illustrations before, but here's a new one. Okay, you are getting ready to jump out of an airplane. You strap yourself to somebody who knows what they're doing. You have never done it before. You know nothing about it. You strap yourself tandem to another person, and you give your life over to them as you fall out of this airplane and believe that they don't have a death wish, but that they're going to pull the ripcord, that they're going to protect you, that they're going to land you safely without breaking your limbs off. And in a sense, that's what we do when we give our lives over to Jesus. We put our life in His hands and say, Jesus, I believe that You know how to run this life better than I know how to run it. That's what we're saying. To have faith in Jesus. I want to put my life in Your hands. Notice the result. In verse 18 he says, and having been set free from sin, you became slaves to righteousness. Okay, so I'm a slave to sin. Now I'm a slave to righteousness. Can't get away from slavery. I don't know if you remember, probably most of you don't, but Bob Dylan's attempt at Christian music there for a while. When he sang that song, you got to serve somebody. It might be the devil. I can sing just as bad as Bob Dylan. It might be the devil, it might be the Lord, but you got to serve somebody, right? And it's so true. You're always going to serve somebody. But what do you want to serve? Who do you want to serve? Who do you want your master to be? I don't think we usually think of our Christianity in these terms. It's not a normal way to think about it. In fact, some of our Christian music artists will even grapple with this in their songs. I remember the Jars of Clay song, Love Song for a Savior. He says, it seems too easy to call you a Savior, not close enough to call you a God. And then again, of course, Jason Gray singing about Jesus, he said it's got to be more like falling in love than something to believe in. More like losing my heart than giving my allegiance. Caught up, called out. Come take a look at me now. It looks like I'm falling in love. And isn't that true? That's the way that it is when it comes to Jesus. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in love, and I hope, all of you probably have at one time or another in your life. But when you fall in love with somebody, all of a sudden things change, don't they? You do things differently. You act differently. You abandon all of your best friends to go hang out with your soulmate. And they're ready to do an intervention because something is seriously wrong with you. What could be so good about her that you're leaving all the guys, right? What would be so good about him that she's not willing to hang with us? It's amazing the things that you'll give up, the things that you'll change about yourself, the things that you do because you are in love with somebody. And that's how it has to be with Jesus. When we give ourselves over to Him, we give ourselves over to Him to fall in love with Him. Now, that happens just like it happens in a human relationship. You fall in love with somebody when you spend time with them, when you have communion with them. When you're talking to them, you experience the joys, you experience the good times, the bad times. You share those with Jesus, as you meet with Him. The Bible tells us to pray without ceasing. What does that mean? 1 Thessalonians 5:17. What it means is to open up a conversation with God that never ends. To talk to Him in the morning and talk to Him all day long. Just never stops. It's always going on. I'm running everything by Him. I'm talking to Him. I'm asking questions about things. I'm asking for help when I need help. I'm asking for help for other people when they need help. It's just this conversation that goes on. And as I begin to develop this relationship with God and this communion with God, and I read His Word, not just to read a chapter every day so I can say I read my Bible today, but to get into the Bible and to look at it and say, God, I need you to speak to me. I want to know you. And then to experience Him in that. And I don't know if you've ever just been reading the Word and something jumps out at you and just blesses you. And when you're in that place, you can't even turn on the Christian radio station to hear a song where you just don't all of a sudden feel this rush of joy and exhilaration because you're singing about your Savior or hearing about your Savior. It becomes a beautiful thing of communion and joy. And anybody, you can fall in love with anybody. On different levels, it's only appropriate in certain ways. But it's interesting, even in my wife and I, when we got married, or when we met rather, the first time we met, I was there at Albertsons, Casey Jones, we were bagging groceries together, and he's like, hey, that girl over there's looking at you. And any girl that's looking at me, I want to see, So I looked over at her, and she looked at me with this coy expression and kind of fluttered her eyelashes. She denies doing that, but I think she was taken. She can't be held accountable to remember what was on her face when she was that full of emotion. But anyway, long story, but that developed into a romance. And we were engaged and we dated for a long time. Of course, fell in love along the way. Got married 20 years ago this month. But that didn't last as long as I'd hoped it would. You know, we fell in love, got married, and probably fell out of love a little bit. Because in that first 3 years, we had a lot of turmoil, a lot of pain, a lot of neglect, a lot of mean words said, a lot of stress. And we kind of drifted apart. And during that time, you know, we were pretty tense. And then we both, apart from each other, but both started to seek the Lord and ask the Lord to help us. And little by little, I began to ask God, show me how to fall in love with my wife. Show me how to love this woman. And He showed me what to do to act in love towards her, you know, to start to show her love. And you know what happened is the feelings began to follow that. And so maybe there was a time when you felt close to the Lord and you've kind of drifted away from that. To draw close to Him again, you just have to start to invest in Him, in your life revolving around Him. It takes time to develop sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's quick. Verse 19, he says, I speak in human terms because of the weakness of your flesh. For just as you present your members as slaves of uncleanness and of lawlessness, leading to more lawlessness, so now present your members as slaves of righteousness for holiness. As a pastor, I have the benefit of seeing many lives work themselves out into Jesus. And I believe, you know, if you think about proofs for Christianity, and of course we have our manuscript evidence, and we have our scientific proofs, and we have a lot of things prove Christianity. But you know, the number one thing that proves Christianity is this: changed lives. And I have watched it again and again and again. I'm always blown away at how Jesus can change somebody's life. And one of the most vivid examples of that was this guy by the name of Sean Klosterman. He was a guy who lived behind my youth pastor, Ty Orr. Some of you know him. He lived behind Ty Orr in a rental that Ty had. Now, Ty bought the house, and he came with the house. So it wasn't like Ty rented to this guy. He was already there. And pretty soon the cops came. There was a situation. Anyway, he was hauled off to jail. And he had this really cool growing operation. He was a very good botanist. They had downstairs in the basement this whole system happening that was against the law. But anyway, the guy was kind of wigged out, and he was just super just intense. You know, the guy was just intense, and just, you know, dealing with him and talking to Ty about him, and just, it was really a handful. Anyway, he went to jail. We were all excited about that. And then about a couple months later, I guess it was, one of my friends came up to me. I think it was Sean, Tim, or one of those guys came up to me, and they said, Sean Klosterman's here at church. And I was like, what? And I just went into mode like, okay, let's get him. I'll grab one arm, you grab the other one. We'll get him out of here before he hurts somebody, you know. And I was like, where? What, do we need to get him out? And he's like, no, man, he's saved. And I was like, no. He's like, yeah. And I see him, and he's like, hey, bro. And I'm like, what? No way. So 20 years later, I mean, I even if I were to go see him now, you know, I think he lives over in Boise. If I were to see him again, he'd be like, hey, bro. He's still crazy. You know, same Jesus crazy freak that he was. But before, oh my goodness, such a crazy transformation. Anyway, what happened was he got put in jail. I think I was kind of responsible for him going there. Don't ever tell him. Anyway, he got put in jail, and this friend of ours, another friend of ours, Craig Phillips, was doing jail ministry at the time, and he went into his cell, and Sean said, I was sitting there on my floor of the cell. I had these voices talking to me, telling me to kill myself. I was coming off of drugs. I was a mess. He said, then Craig came in and shared the gospel with me, and I accepted Jesus. Instantly, I was in my right mind. Instantly, I was delivered from drugs. And just awesome, you know, just awesome to see how God could deliver somebody so quickly. And then I've seen atheists, hardened atheists, who are like, I don't believe in God. I hate Jesus. You know, just intense. And in one moment, Jesus gets a hold of them. They get saved and completely transformed. Completely transformed. What does that? Nothing but Jesus. Nothing but the blood of Jesus can transform a life so radically. And yet, why do some Christians catch fire and others kind of live a humdrum life? It always comes when a person is ready to give up, is ready to surrender all, when they have nowhere else to go. And they say, Jesus, you have it all. I need all of you, and I give you all of me. I know that's a catch for a lot of people. That thing, that person, that show, that drug, that opportunity, that guy, that gal, that drink, that place, that habit, that bitterness, that game, that money, that thing that is keeping you from all that God has created you to be. All that God wants you to be. What's keeping you what you were created for. I know. I've been there. I get it. Don't mess with my precious. Me wants it, right? Me needs it. It's like intense in people. Me has to, It's something that holds you, and that's very common for anybody who's an addict. Every addict feels that way. But there comes a moment in our life when I have to choose the peace, the joy, to choose Jesus. And I think, we come to Christ and we're saved. But Jesus sometimes will be like, that needs to go. And we just can't. We just can't let go of it. We can't. But when we do, when we let the poison go, we catch fire. Verse 20. It says, for when you were slaves of sin, you were freed in regard to righteousness. Before you were saved, you were just going to do whatever the body wanted to do. You're just a slave to whatever. You didn't have any thought to do anything holy or righteous. It just wasn't your vibe. But then you got saved and something changed. I remember, I used to hang out with my friend Brian before, and we weren't friends. We were in a similar group, and we were put together a lot, but we kind of hated each other. But we would hang out in these groups, and him and I would fight sometimes, and just tension all the time. And we'd do things that were illegal sometimes. We would, do all kinds of crazy stuff, just crazy stuff. And then we got saved. Brian got saved, I got saved. We became friends. Long story, but kind of a cool thing. And now we're saved, and we have nothing better to do than to go to Denny's and to witness to the people sitting in the booth next to us. Whoever poor soul would be sitting next to us, we would be talking to them about Jesus. And I remember one time, it kind of all came to a head this one time when we were driving down the road in Main Street in Pocatello, and we're in his grandma's ratty truck with the windows down, and we're singing at the top of our lungs, I love your grace, I love your mercy. We're just into it. We're just praising Jesus. And I look over at him, and I just was like, what has happened? This is so bizarre. We were so different, and something has changed, and it wasn't like all of a sudden it was like, from now on we're going to start wearing, holy collars and start acting like priests or something. That wasn't it at all. Something changed inside. And we became slaves to do what God wanted us to do. We just wanted to. It was weird. It's weird. He says, verse 21, what fruit did you have then in the things which you are now ashamed? For the end of those things is death. We look at all of our accomplishments outside of Christ, and what did they produce? Even if we were successful, we realized in the success that it didn't satisfy us for but a moment. Then we were on to the next thing. I don't know, I think God has blessed me with the ability to have the wherewithal to play things out to their conclusion. Everybody's offered temptation. Everybody is in that moment when, things could go one way or the other. And it's just easy for me. It always has been easy for me just to play it out. Okay, so this is the first step, and this leads to this last step, where I lose my wife and my kids and my job, and everything is destroyed. I remember when my son was born, looking into his eyes and thinking, man, he doesn't have to go through what I went through as a kid. because I'm going to be faithful to my wife by the grace of God. And just to see I can give a different legacy, I can have a different outcome than my poor kid had. But how does all this happen? How do we get there? I was in Belize on a mission trip, and the pastor there, Patrick, him and I were on the peninsula, and we're hanging out, and this Guatemalan guy comes up to us, and he says, "Hey, you guys want to go for a boat ride?" And I'm thinking, I hate the ocean. I am not a fan of large bodies of water. I do not like, but I look out there and it's a pretty clear day, pretty still. And YOLO, right? How often are you in Belize on the Caribbean? So I'm like, okay, let's go. So we get in this ocean kayak. Translation, a piece of plastic that is a little coffin for a watery, bloody grave, right? I get into this ocean kayak and I paddle out, and I'm thinking, okay, well, I just don't want to be too far out, And so we paddle out, and I'm looking back. Okay, we're 200 yards or so from shore. I could swim this if I have to. See, this is the problem. This is really where it went bad. On my way there, on the flight, I was given a book by a friend that he wrote, and it was basically this kid. It's like a teenager mystery book. And basically in the book, a guy escapes from this evil dude on an island, and he sails into the Caribbean, and something happens. He goes overboard, and he ends up fighting with this hammerhead shark. Okay? So, Caribbean, overboard. I'm in a little piece of plastic on the Caribbean Sea. Are there hammerhead sharks in here? I bet there are. I'm going to die. But anyway, so I'm like, okay, so I got to stay close to the shore. So I get out there, and I'm facing eternity, right? There's nothing. I can't see even a key, just like nothing. It's just like eternity. And I'm in this little kayak, and Patrick is 50 feet away over here. The Guatemalan guy is over here. I'm fishing. We're out there for a couple hours probably. Finally, nothing changed. We're just there, right? I look back, and it's not there anymore. What was 200 yards away? We have drifted like a mile and a half out into the ocean, and I am on a little piece of plastic. If you've seen an ocean kayak, this is like shark bait, right? And I'm like, I'm going to die. I'm just like, oh my goodness. So I'm like, okay, guys, time to go back. But that's how sin is. You don't realize you're moving. You don't realize you're going in the wrong direction. You're drifting from the Lord. You don't just decide one day, I'm just worshiping the Lord. You know what, Lord, tomorrow I'm just going to dump you. Do you? It doesn't happen that way. It happens when I don't have time today. And it becomes more sporadic, and then it becomes a burden and guilt and whatever. And next thing you know, these sins start to come in on this side, and we drift there. So incrementally we don't even notice. You know how we keep ourselves from sin? Maybe a little known secret. We keep ourselves from sin not by giving ourselves a law, not by giving ourselves a rule book of things we're not going to do, and not by focusing on not sinning, right? I'm not going to pick up the pipe. I'm not going to pick up the pipe. Oh, no. Finally. You pick up the pipe. Why? Because you're focusing on the sin. Comes at you like a tidal wave. But when we focus on Jesus and work on our relationship with Him, all the sin becomes less and less appealing. We become addicted to Jesus, right? We want Him instead of the sin. I know that a lot of you guys probably struggle with what I struggled with when I got saved, and that was just images in my mind. I had so many pictures in my head of things I did, of things I had done, things I'd looked at, things that I had been a part of. All these pictures just clouding my mind, just coming up all the time, just coming. And so as a young man, just wanting to be clean, wanting to serve the Lord Jesus, I just started. The Lord gave me something. I believe this was a gift from God. And what I did is every time a picture would come up, I'd rip it in half and throw it away. Rip it in half, throw it away. Rip it in half, throw it away. Rip it in half, throw it away. Every time it came into my mind. Now, I'm traveling church to church at that time in my life. And so I'm in church thinking of things I don't want to be thinking about in church, right? And so rip it up, throw it away, rip it up, throw it away, rip it up, throw it away. And pretty soon, probably after about 2 months of that, I would say, it's hard to say how long it took, but they just stopped coming. I remember Britt Merrick used to say, I just eject the tape. Whenever it comes up, I just eject the tape. We just visualize a recorder, eject the tape. And I was thinking, man, that poor guy, he had video going on. I just had pictures. But whatever the case, whatever you need to do just to take every thought captive and into obedience. Lord, I don't want to look at that. I don't want to remember that. And rip it apart. And it just went away. Beautiful. Verse 22, he says, but now having been set free from sin and having become slaves of God, you have your fruit to holiness and the end everlasting life. If you've trusted Jesus, you're set free from sin. You can choose not to sin. Maybe you're thinking, you don't understand, Pastor Mike. I'm a single person, and you don't know how hard it is for me. Let me just say this. There are dozens of single people in our fellowship who are living in purity. It can be done. And let me say this also. It's easier to be single and wish you were married than to be married and wish you were single. Just saying. No amens from the married people. It's not appropriate. What is my suggestion? What is my counsel to the people who are single and struggling? My counsel to you is fall in love with Jesus. Spend time falling in love with Jesus. Just take some time to do that. Because things will get harder. Once you get married, your walk with the Lord will take a hit a little bit. For a time. Hopefully together it will become stronger. But it does take something from your relationship with Jesus when you get married at first. And you have to kind of focus on being with another person and getting them and working through that. And so if you have the opportunity in the singleness to just focus on Jesus, then take some time to do that. Fall in love with Him and discover what it means to have fullness of joy. That's what He says. In His presence is fullness of joy, and His right hand pleasures forevermore. And what an awesome opportunity you have for that. Paul said this, no temptation has overtaken you except that which is common to man. Everybody goes through it. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation also make a way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. Idolatry, at its base, is covetousness, is lust. Flee from it. Whatever you desire more than God. How do I know if I desire it more than God? Well, if I can't live without it. If the thought of losing it, I'd rather lose God than it, yeah, well then it's a problem, right? We have this dog Gus, short for Augustus. As a puppy, he was very, very much naughty. Pooped on that floor, peed on the floor, chewed things up incessantly. If he wouldn't have been cute, I would have killed him. And that's why God makes puppies cute, so you don't kill them. Shannon said, if we're going to keep this dog, he needs to go to obedience school. I was like, okay. So, and I kind of agreed. And so we sent him to obedience school. He got him this cool e-collar. It's kind of neat. It vibrates the muscle, and it vibrates, and then it also does like a pulse. Like, if you were to go to the chiropractor, they put those contraction things on your muscles to contract your muscles. That's kind of what it does. You can actually do it on yourself. I did it to myself, the shock collar. It wasn't a shock. It was more of a bzz, bzz, really neat sensation. But anyway, it works. Just kidding. But what's cool is that now that he has this training and he has this collar, he's like a new dog. I mean, it's just really cool. I can take him, I put a leash on him because it's the law, right? You can't go off leash, but I can put a leash on him and I don't hold the leash. He just goes with me. And I say heel and he heels. I say sit, he sits. I say place and I point to a surface and he jumps up on it and he sits there until I tell him break, and then he gets off. And when I say break, he goes and runs, and I say, hey, Gus, come. And he comes immediately. I rarely have to even use the shocker or the e-collar at all for him. He just obeys. It's amazing. And what I was kind of thinking about is Gus has more freedom Before it was like, put him back in the back, close the gate, keep him back there, don't get him in the house. And if we let him in the house, we had to watch him like a hawk, because he's going to poop, he's going to pee, he's going to chew. Now, he did backslide the other day, I admit. And he murdered one of Hannah's Barbie dolls, which actually I thought was kind of cool. He ripped its head off, chewed the arms off. Like, sweet. Like some kind of... But I still had to discipline him for it, even though I thought it was cool. I put him in his kennel, and he took away some of his freedom. But with obedience comes freedom, doesn't it? And it's the same with us. Some people can't see past that, and they think that somehow God is going to be oppressive. They think that somehow surrendering to God or being a slave to God or righteousness is going to be oppressive, but it's the opposite. We're set free from having to do all the things that bring regret and shame. And we're given freedom to serve Jesus. And what is beautiful about this, to carry the dog analogy just a little bit longer. When Gus does something good, I reward him, right? If it's not, good boy, it's a treat. And when I obey God, He gives me a treat too. And that sounds kind of weird, but like if He says, hey, I want you to go talk to that person, and I open up the Word to them and they get saved, or, God uses me in some way, man, I feel amazing. It's like the Lord just gives me a blessing for that. And I can't wait to do it again, and it's just like it perpetuates itself. Obedience perpetuates blessing in my life. But the opposite is this, verse 23. The wages of sin is death. But the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. When you sin, you earn something. But the gift of God is free. Now, what you earn is bad. Someone once said, sow a thought, reap an action, sow an action, reap a habit, sow a habit, reap a character, sow a character, reap a destiny. And I added to that because I thought it was missing one thing, sow a destiny, reap a legacy. Whatever we sow, that's what we're going to reap. And if we yield to Jesus, we're going to sow a life that is so much better, and we're going to leave that life to our children. But if we sow corruption and sin, it's going to perpetuate itself too. That's why the gift of God is so important. It's a gift. It's free. And it's to you, it's to me, it's to everyone. And it's to the degree that you will surrender yourself to Jesus. To say, Jesus, you have everything I need. I want to give my life completely to you. And I'm going to give you a guarantee. Okay? You ready for the guarantee? Here's the guarantee. This is a guarantee. Pastor Mike guarantee. Calvary Chapel guarantee. Jesus guarantee. I guarantee you that Jesus can do your life better than you can. I know He can. I guarantee it. Let's pray.